Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call to order the SAP project periodic oversight. And let's start with introductions. We'll start on Ms.
Zig Burton, Zico Consulting.
Alden Thurn, Deputy Missile Manager.
Elder Bray Jackson.
John Middleton.
Tim Steele.
Forrest Dunbar.
B. Peterson.
And the audience, please identify yourself.
Terrence Pearson.
Rosella Young, OAC.
Ken Franco, SAP.
Rose Foley, Assembly Budget Analyst.
Mike Chadwick, Internal Audit.
Thank you. You have the floor.
Great, thank you. So hello, everyone. This is our October report with pretty much a standard approach of the things, sections we'll talk about. I want to talk a little bit about project progress. We have basically restated the weekly progress report that the project management office generates. Theirs is for the last 5 or 6 weeks, and we're trying to kind of track this thing since the beginning of the realization build phase. So that's what you're seeing up there. And you can basically see that there are a couple of line items, or a couple of areas that are now reporting red. So the finance team is reporting red, and the data migration team is reporting red. The data migration team has been struggling because they've not gotten the data they were expecting, and it's kind of slowing them down. Apparently they have now picked that up and are in pretty good shape. I think we should recognize that the cleansing group is indicating that they're all perfectly clean, and yet the migration team says they've got some bad data. So a little anomaly there. In the coming weeks, they're going to group those two together, so we're not actually going to have the visibility to that anymore. The team's going to add CABA as one of the line items, which is a good thing, so that you've got some visibility at time collection. And then, of course, starting in December, we'll start seeing a line item for testing.
I'd like to, for the record, note that Mr. Trainee has joined us. Thank you.
Mr. Trainee, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, sir. Sorry for being late.
Okay. I had this one up here last week just to kind of show you that we need to be kind of looking at some of these documents and some of these status reports in conjunction, because we did have an anomaly last month where we had the finance team saying up there at the top it said schedule is red, so they were off track, they were in trouble. Yet if you look at the bar down below where it says file a team realization, they're saying they're ahead of schedule. So that needed to get fixed, and I think they finally recognized that anomaly needs to be resolved. So we got some confusing information. Some of it's good, but we got some confusing information with the team's overall bar chart. The top arrow there is pointing at the realization build phase. The realization build phase is supposed to, in essence, finish. As you can see, it's supposed to finish in about 3 or 4 weeks. The reason why it's confusing is that there's still some things that are hanging out that won't be finished, and we're not really given any visibility to that. So we find that confusing. The other line item that we thought was in fairly good shape is the fact that the organization change management team is scheduled to start developing training material. That's a good thing, and they need to get going on that. It's going to take quite a few people to develop the training material over the next 4 or 5 months, so that around middle of the first quarter, they need to be ready to start training. The problem now is that all of a sudden they can't get their resources. So they're struggling with the fact that they need to get their resources so that they can start doing the training material. So that's going to start showing behind. That's going to start showing red. In fact, it's my understanding, based on some information I received today, they may not have their resources until January. And so that's going to cause some issues. Some comments about governance. We need to recognize that Ken, who's here today, has got to be off-site for about, I think, 5 contiguous weeks. It's an IRS ruling with regard to whether or not he becomes an employee from an IRS perspective. So he needs to basically be gone. He'll still work on the project. There'll be conference calls, emails, and all that sort of thing. So he won't be here, and those 5 contiguous weeks happen to be coming up now. It's got to get done before the end of the year. So just as we are wrapping things up, and just as we are starting the first integration test cycle he's gonna have to be off-site.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to go back to the previous slide, you're saying that the training is going to be running behind and it may not get going until next year. Is this because of budget or the short funds? Is that what the problem is?
Certainly, there's gonna be a budgetary effect if they have to add more resources, but right now, it's an issue with procurement and purchasing and basically getting through the RFP process or the IFQ process, whatever approach is being used. But they'll literally need to bring in those resources that they're gonna have to contract. And that's, I mean, the money is there, it's all set up, it's been issued, there's all kinds of struggles with just getting a resolution on which 5 people are they gonna bring in.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Thurn, your facial expressions tells me that you'd like to add to this.
This process, the procurement process, I know we're a municipality. I've worked in the public sector for a long time. It's killing a project like this, where you have to be very responsive and make changes on an ongoing basis. I mean, I go sell my soul almost weekly to the purchasing, to Ron Haddon and say, I have an emergency. I need something to happen here. Can I make it happen? So on this particular one, when we actually put out an intent to bid back in like April. We got some responses back, and we asked for the training developers at that point in time because we knew we were going to need them. But we didn't hire them right then and there. We just wanted to do it as a process with some other positions that we were hiring. So then, when we waited 3 months later when we wanted to start do it, purchasing said, well, the time period has lapsed, is too long from when the original one went out. You have to do it all over again. And by the way, we don't want you to do it the way you did it before. It has to be a completely different way. So then we had to put out an RFP, and as you know, that has to go out for several weeks. And then we got a couple of responses back. And now there's issues with 2 of the 3 vendors that came back with something, so you're checking into that. And before you know it, weeks are going by, and you're interviewing, and then I don't know if the amount has then to go to the assembly. I'm not a big purchasing person here, but I don't know if we put out an RFP, if it's under $500,000, do we have to go back or not go back to say that these are the winning vendors and these are the people we want to hire? But if we do have to do that, then that's another 3 weeks onto the process. And in the meantime, that little bar keeps moving. I can't stop the bar. It keeps moving, and we don't have anybody. So yes, that is the history of us trying to find developers for the project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trainee.
When's your next appointment with purchasing? When do you meet with them again?
The Muni project manager, John Marcinko, is supposed to be contacting Ron Haddon today to go through some of the vendor issues that have come up in the most recent RFP. I think that was where we had it this morning, Ken, right? So he was going to try to get Ron to get back to him. They have to evaluate the vendor first for qualifications before they can go and actually look for people that they have supplied with resumes to be able to go to the next thing.
We make an appointment with Ron Haddon, you, Elvin and I will show up and attend the meeting with you. Because I don't want purchasing to delay this process or to take this time schedule and put it off further. I want to get this thing done.
And you've seen it a couple of times.
I'm telling you, we're offering, we'll both go with you. Hold your hand if we have to. We'll make sure we can put the pressure on purchasing to get this done.
They can be intimidated.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I don't appreciate your comment, Mr. Steele. But please continue.
And an additional comment on that too. Mr. Peterson was talking about whether or not there's a budget thing. I mean, the thing we need to be aware of is presumably we're going to not change that target date of 7/1. If that's the case, the training has to get done before then, and the training material has to get done before then. If this gets pushed to January, then that team is going to have to increase the number of people necessary to develop the training material. We're talking about approximately 60 courses. This is not inconsequential. Okay?
The
And
project
then
has
you've
the
got
money.
to actually conduct those 60 courses in the few months before you go live.
Mr. Peterson?
So, courses now, how long is the course? Is it a 3-day, a 1-day, a week?
A little of all the above.
Yeah, they're most likely going to be like an hour course for somebody to actually take it on a job. But to develop that course, they're estimating 40 to 80 hours a piece to develop the course and be able to do it. Now, with that being said, this is one area where we are attempting to leverage. We didn't find very much, but some of the prior work from the money that was spent long ago. The training course thing is one area where we think we can get at least some work that's been done before to help us speed up. They're not creating them all from scratch, so I'm hoping that that eventually will help us catch up here. They have evaluated all those courses that were already developed and how they can maybe tweak them in most areas. But, and as I mentioned, the project has the money for the, it's not that I don't have the money, I just can't get people to fill the positions. So.
Anything else, Mr. Peterson?
Thank you.
Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so to continue, we were saying that you're concerning that Ken is not going to be around near the end of the year, but the good news is that's also some of the holiday period, so there'll be some times when people are literally not going to be working on the project. And secondly, the prior program manager is available and will probably be here full-time to cover for Ken being here. And Ken, as we had talked earlier, he is on this project in essence full-time, so he does come here every week. And related to that,
If I might say that, as I've mentioned, every consultant is in this situation. This is not just Ken specifically for him. I've mentioned this LTA we've been talking about. All of our consultants have been rolling off for 5-week periods since August, so, and it's going to continue all the way through May. It's the unfortunate part, but this just happens to be Ken's time period.
Thank you. Please continue.
the last point, second bullet on there, talks about the senior consultant who is basically reporting to the ESC. That's John Marchinko. He's still not here, at least to my knowledge and understanding, really 100% of the time. And since he is now dedicated and specifically focused on working very directly with all the MOA staff and guiding and leading them and so forth, and is actually being held accountable for their activities, he really ought to be here. So,
I have a question. Because that was one of your concerns,
absolutely.
that, he isn't here. And a lot of our consultants come from other places, so I really wasn't concerned at one point, but I'm beginning to be concerned now. Tremendously concerned.
Well, I do know that Alden has been working with him, and that on a short-term basis, is this fair, Alden, that he is going to be here full-time for the next how many weeks?
This week and the next 3, he will be here because his responsibility is data, and as you saw, data is red. So to this next 1-month period, he has committed to be here every week. And then back to his contractual negotiated thing after that.
Back to a $600,000 paycheck. Thank you. Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the delivery gaps. So why am I bringing this up right now? The entire project is coming to a very major point. That major point in the project is, okay, we finished programming, we finished unit testing, we're now ready to start doing integration testing. We're going to start fitting everything together. Major position in the project. Okay, so needless to say, the contract, as far as SAP is concerned, expects the Muni to then approve what's been done and approve going forward. Key thing. There's a target date for that. It's 11/28. So now the reason I've got an X up there is because I wrote this a month ago, and at that time everybody thought we were going to do this big approval at the end of October. Well, since then, the project has been extended by 3 weeks for the build phase, for the development phase, and so now it's the end of November. That's why that's up there. So what's contractually in there? So they're talking about realization build phase. So what's in there? In the contract, it says all functional design, which in essence is configuration, is supposed to be done. That's the sign-off. Specifications for all of the RICEP objects, and we've used this term before, it's reports, interfaces, conversions, enhancements, and forms, and workflow. So that's what those letters mean. So the specifications on what to do with all of those is also supposed to be done. And notice that the word all is underlined. I did that, okay? Then it also says the development, the coding, the programming of all those RICEP objects and their related unit testing is supposed to be a precursor to getting integration testing going. So that's also something that needs to be done, that Alden needs to approve. So what's the criteria? What's the criteria for, in essence, exiting or saying we have finished the realization build phase. What's that criteria? It's in the contract. It says all plan configuration, including security and development, has been completed. It's in the contract. Unit testing and documentation have been completed, and all unit testing, critical and high severity defects as defined in the testing strategy plan have been resolved and retested. Okay? The word all is in there. Okay? Program sponsor consent has been obtained to close the realization build phase and proceed to the realization test phase. That's what is Alden's responsibility to do. It's a big deal. Okay? So, well, where is all this? How's it coming? All plan configuration. All I'm suggesting there is it needs to be clearly listed. It needs to be clearly listed. Can't just take the statement, we've done it all. It needs to be clearly listed. Okay? In terms of all that testing, again, it needs to be clearly listed. That's what I'm suggesting needs to happen. Alden needs to ask for that. Okay? Before he signs off. We also talked about the fact that you end one phase, you start the other. Okay, so we've got entrance criteria. I find this one interesting. First statement is in the contract. It's on page 18. The program management plans will define the entrance criteria for the realization testing phase. In other words, they're not in the contract. It just simply says, go find the program management plans, and in there somewhere will be the entrance criteria. And the entrance criteria is all about what has to be in place in order for us to do the testing. Okay? What has to be in place? So that's the responsibility. Those program management plans are the responsibility of the program manager. Okay? I'm still waiting for what's the specificity that's in those plans that basically says, this is what has to be in place in order to start integration testing. And Alden needs to see that and needs to understand that and approve that. Cool. So let's talk. Let's talk a little bit about that statement of work. A little bit more about that statement of work. And you've heard about this. You've heard the term gaps. I mean, there are some gaps between the statement of work, which is the contract that SAP says this is what we will do, and the Muni's expectations. And those gaps, and there are some, have been negotiated with SAP over the past few months. And there's a lot of negotiation going on. Certainly, the Muni's taking the position that they'd like to have a lot of this, they expect a lot of this, and they really don't want to spend a lot more money on it. SAP, of course, expects to be paid for their energies and their time. So those are starting to become relatively sizable in terms of how much money is involved. We're not talking about $100,000 here. We're talking about multiples of 7 digits. Okay? Some of the examples of those. We've already talked about the fact that right after we met last week, they announced the extension of 3 weeks on the build phase. Now, SAP is doing that without a change order. At some point in time, they're going to expect to say, we need to have a change order, we need to be paid for those extra 3 weeks. But that's an example of one of the gaps. The other thing we're going to talk about a little further is the application management services contract, which happens to run out 12/31 of this year, not next year, this year. And then there are 34 deferred reports I'm aware of. I've seen the list that were deferred, and basically SAP was asked to say, well, do you have some standard reports that would actually solve this issue and would provide this reporting for us? I can tell you now that the answer is no. So that becomes additional work. This application services, the application management services, SAP is providing services for the system in order to let the system operate and run while everybody is developing. Okay, it's a contracted service. Their people provide hours and time based on requests to make corrections, adjustments, and changes, which is to maybe reload a database, connect the database, set up a server, a variety of technology activities. It will be included as part of the off-site support activities that start July 1 when you're basically, you have that head contract, that relationship where they're running everything remote. Okay, so that's going to be taken care of. But that's July 1, give or take. Well, you've got January to July where you don't have coverage now. So that's a serious gap. That means that, really that contract needs to be extended, but that doesn't come free. Okay? The current contract, I've got a copy of the contract, it's in excess of $2 million for the year of 2016. One would think that if you do it for 6 months, it'd probably be in the range of half of that. Okay? So about this impending checkpoint, we need to, in this sheet, the first cycle of testing has to start right after that date. In order to maintain pace, in order to get 3 cycles of integration testing done, got to get moving. Okay, so MOA must approve that the development results prior to proceeding with integration. Okay, so I'm suggesting, and I've said this, the work product and the deliverables should be provided for approval to Alden so he can see them, understand them, and see the entire list. The thing that is concerning to me is that the items that are left on the table is not clear. What's left? I mean, there are some items we can already, I've looked at the plan. One example is the CAFR report. There's 10 reports. The development and unit testing, part of the realization build, is planned for finishing in April. Okay? That's the plan. I don't know if it's right, wrong, or should be moved, but the point is that's an example of something that's, in essence, left on the table. Alden needs to have that list, so he says, I know what's left on the table, because he really needs to sign off on that part when it's time. Does that make sense?
I have a question. So when you talk about the CAFR, everybody knows what that means, right? Okay. So give me a little bit more detail. I mean, I'm not clear on what you're talking about when you reference the CAFR.
Let me reference that.
Thank you.
So the municipality has 10 CAFR reports that we put out through the accounting department and so forth. Early in the process, because remember, that's a consolidated annual financial statement.
Right.
So it's the consolidation of that, which means everything that leading to that has to be done in advance of that. The FILO team, as you're aware, has been behind and working and so forth. So rather than spending their time on these 10 CAFR reports in June, there's a lot of higher priorities. They intentionally, early on in the realization process, said this is really an after-the-fact kind of a thing. Let's defer that until January, February, March time frame for us to create and develop it. We'll be in SIT testing, have more time to be able to do the configuration and blueprinting of that. And we need it anyway because we have to make sure everything else is working and programmed and so forth, because those all feed into those particular reports. So it was a conscious project management decision to delay those into that quarter. However, Zig is absolutely right. That is technically a realization and build thing. So when I sign going from one to the other, we have to be able to hold SAP and their people responsible that they didn't finish everything in realization build. There was a piece that we made a conscious decision of that we're moving so that when we get to that part, one, they're held responsible for doing it, and two, I don't get charged saying that that's something extra because I signed off on the 28th that everything was done. And that's one example, and there's a laundry list of items that are not going to be ready at that point in time.
Right, I appreciate that, but as everybody knows, there's some deadlines for when the CAFR's due.
Well, the CAFR for next year is off of PeopleSoft, which
So
will
you're
go,
gonna use PeopleSoft
which
for
goes
next
through
year?
this December 31st, and then when they get the CAFR done in June or July-ish time period, it's
Okay.
on this one. So what we're really talking about as well is the reports for CAFR for 2018. So that's another reason why it was kind of deferred, because we're not going to be using them for this year's CAFR.
So the reports for 2017 then,
27.
not 18, 2017.
2017 year is
Right.
what these reports are going to
Right.
be that we would be using in 2018
Right.
to be able to create them.
Right, thank you. Please continue.
Okay. So I really think that the team needs to, in essence, create two components of the realization build phase. I call them A and B. should adjust the fact you need to have visibility to recognize that that's out there. If it were just one little item, who cares? But if it starts becoming 1,000 or 2,000 hours of work, it becomes somewhat significant. And it needs to be shown, and it's not. And we really suggest that it be done, and they should really show it out there, because and there should be another sign-off point at the conclusion of Part B. Okay? So our concerns, the master plan does not reflect the continuation or realization build. Okay? It does not reflect the sign-off for that, and then we need to kind of remind everybody, I think this is a big gap, big concern. An application management services contract expires 12/31. Okay, so we have been always continually talking to you about running costs here. The running costs, they are updated as of 10/15. I got the latest one this morning, so I couldn't get you the third week of October, which I do have. But that's September looks a little strange, but that's because it covers 5 weeks. October is just the 2 weeks. The run rate's still right around $375,000 per week. Okay, so you can be looking over the next couple of months about 1.5 million monthly. The main reason is that the global resources, those folks working in India, has doubled from 10 to 20. Okay, and that's a somewhat expected increase. The monthly cost to date numbers. I guess, we've talked about this several times. The muni resources have not been consistently charging and getting their charges allocated to the capital project. It's getting better. They're getting more in there. They're still not quite up to snuff in terms of getting their charges in there. And then the other thing is because, and this is information coming from the accounting system, so it doesn't reflect the fact that we're not paying some bills. And that means that in essence we are understating what our accounting system says we have spent on the project. It could be $3 million, it could be $4 million, but the point is that it's a number that I think you guys ought to be aware of, and you should be aware that means that you could be, because you're understating, you could allow this project to overrun and get yourself into a box.
Mr. Thurman?
I did bring over $1 million today, so if that's good news or bad news. Good news, they got around $1 million. Bad news, we're spending $1 million.
Do you have any more?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thurman. Please continue.
Continue, okay. We've been talking about the critical success factors. I really don't want to spend time going through the long list that we've had, but I do want to remind you about this one from last month, which was the whole idea of adjust your plans to reality. And this is all what we just got through talking about, which is really think you got to break that realization build phase into 2 pieces and recognize it and make it visible. Okay? So here's the new one. Define success. You need to know what July 1 really is going to be. You need to define that. So you've got a solution here that you're going forward and you're trying to go live. So you've got to design the solution, which is done, except that we're going to talk about the fact that there are a couple of major items that are not in there. We need to configure the software. That's almost done. We need to develop the surrounding components, which are the reports and interfaces and so on. That's in process, not even close to being done. Unit testing, that is associated with development. Again, that's in process. And then you start the integration testing, and that's a major thing to do. Okay? So I just want to remind everybody what kind of numbers we're talking about here. This is the list of documentation that, if you recall, in January and February, all that was going through and beating this to death, okay, to get done with the blueprint. Whether or not the numbers are perfect in terms of the accuracy, can't tell you. But pretty close. There are 588 documents in finance and logistics. There are 447 documents in human capital. These are the design documents. Okay, these are the ones that in essence drive how the software is going to be configured. Okay, that's what that is. Then we've got these famous RICEs, okay? Workflows, reports, interfaces, conversions, enhancements, and forms. In the finance side, we have 188 of these. In the human capital side, we have 359 of these things. Each one of these things represents something that requires programming and unit testing. So it reflects the scope of the development work. Those are the lists that we're talking about that Alden needs to see. And that's, you can imagine, you get a list of 188 items. Okay. So know what you're getting. We're talking about, you got to define success. So what's success going to be? Know what you're getting. The circle in the middle is what the SAP contract says they're going to do for us. It's not everything. I think it's important to recognize that it's not everything. You know, they've got the whole, Philo and HCM modules, business warehouse, business intelligence, the RICEs that are specified in the SOW, and the standard portal. Those are all things that, in essence, SAP is, they're going to deliver that. Okay? But we got a nice list of things sitting out there that's outside of what they're supposed to do. Up in the upper left, you got CABA for time collection. You got ECM, which is Enterprise Content Management. Of all those words up there, starting with Enterprise SAP Portal, yet the problem is, and this is the thing that everybody's discovered is, we didn't address how to do the queries that are represented in Muniverse, which is this Muni's Enterprise Portal. Well, there's pages and pages and pages of queries that got left off the table. All right? Existing reports that are...
Just for clarification, when you say Universe, you're talking about the web-based PeopleSoft, correct?
Yes,
Thank you.
exactly. That's exactly what we're talking
Thank you.
about. And then existing reports not funded, this is the 34 reports we talked about earlier. There was not enough money, they're not in the contract, SAP's not going to deliver them. Okay, which is why we said, maybe we can use your standard reports, it won't cost anything. Didn't work. All right, so they're still sitting out there. Somebody's got to figure out what to do about it. Okay, data preparation, that's all, the contract states very clearly SAP is not responsible for getting the data ready to move into the system. I mean, that's out there. Inbound interfaces, we've heard about some of the difficulties and struggles. The team is catching up, they're getting better, but I know there's one particular interface, I believe it's from Fire, correct? Just simply, they can't seem to get that one done. Those are examples, and I'm just saying, we need to know that the blueprint has a much broader scope, much bigger picture than the SAP contract. Reporting is not being addressed by the SAP team. The blueprint calls for, I've got several lists of how many reports are in blueprint. One of them says 70, the other one says 120. The point is there are a lot of reports. SAP contract calls for 13 HCM reports and 67 Philo reports plus the 10 CAPA reports. That's in the contract. That's what they'll do. Okay? So what's the gap? Well, there's 34 reports that have been deferred in the process, and we just talked about those. Those are the ones everybody's trying to figure out how we might be able to use SAP standard reports. Not going to happen. Okay? And then there's the equivalent of the PeopleSoft web-based reporting. That's what you were talking about. That was not in the blueprint. It was not addressed. Everybody's struggling right now trying to figure out how to address those.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I remember way back when you stood before us and you said, it's what we're missing. It's what, if it's not complete, well documented, if we don't do it in the right order, if we don't have it when we need it, then it's going to cause us huge issues down the line because you're going to have holes in your system, whether it's courses or training materials or configuration of various types. And I'm worried that what you're saying is, it's coming, and that worries me a tad.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Theron?
Just a few minutes on Universe here to kind of relay everybody's concerns. There are no reports in Universe. Universe is a querying tool. It queries the PeopleSoft database and provides an answer. It's not like a written report and then it comes out of it. So the word report is a little bit misleading because reports take longer to develop and so forth to be able to do that. So in actuality, the timing's always good, just like it was last time. At 1:30 here, we were having a demonstration by SAP to kind of deal with this. So what we're going to be looking at from a demonstration is how do we query the SAP database? Because people want to know that's where our current information, our active information is going to be in. So we're going to go through a demo so that the functional steering committee, which is our directors basically, have an idea what it's going to take to be able to query that. In addition to that, we're going to copy and paste the historical PeopleSoft into the HANA database that we paid for last year. This same tool that queries the current SAP database will be available to query the HANA PeopleSoft database. The problem is, if you remember, PeopleSoft is in its format and SAP is in its format. So while we will have the data and we will have the tools to be able to get the data out, we probably will have to find somebody with the technical ability to be able to do that, and that's going to take some time. And you can't do that until you go live because you have to have the database copied over. So the people, when we go live, will not have access to what they've historically had. What are we going to do about that? We're going to keep PeopleSoft alive in a state of just frozen state, so to speak, where they can use Muniverse to be able to query the historical portion of it. So that's just a part of our strategy here to address this particular gap in our development.
Thank you, Mr. Thurman. And I just have a comment, okay, because I remember when PeopleSoft went web-based, and I remember the person responsible for doing it, Scott Von Gemmingen. You may want to get in touch with him. Just a thought. Thank you. Please continue.
A lot of work here, though.
I know.
So just a couple of comments about the enterprise portal. I mean, again, the enterprise portal was not in the blueprint. Okay, SAP has indicated that, hey, you can use the standard portal, but you're not going to make any changes to it unless you pay us. Okay, so just need to remember that yes, there's going to be a portal. Yes, it'll allow folks to access SAP. And yes, it'll allow folks to do queries. They just simply have to be trained and know and understand. And it's all a matter of the change management of whether or not people will comfortably move from their ability to query the way they query in Muniverse to querying another way.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
Okay.
Mr. Delper.
So,
Yes,
why,
sir.
actually, Mr. Attorney, could you explain, or either of you, why do the enterprises need a separate portal? Or do they need a separate portal? Why can't they use the same, maybe you'll be accessing a different set of data, but why can't the portal itself look the same?
There will be one portal that we'll be able to go into. When we first to enterprise portal, it's a more robust, kind of custom, homegrown kind of thing with making it look nice and bells and whistles and special ways to make it happen. That's been, the municipality has taken time and resources over the years to make it customized, so to speak. What we're getting initially from SAP is a portal that will be a plain Jane, vanilla is the word that keeps getting used. The access will be there. Access will be there from even vendors externally and all this, and we've been working on that. But is it going to be beautiful and bells and whistles and so forth? It's probably going to be like basic functionality, and it'll be something that over a period of time after that will have to be developed. But as Zig stated, there was no money in the original allocation here to go in there and have a portal developer really get in there and make it, massage what the standard vanilla version was to make it acceptable. But the system will be operable, people will be able to do it. It's just going to be, it might be a few more clicks than what we would like. It might not look the way we want to look at it, but they'll be able to do the functionality, which is the key. But that's what they're referring to an enterprise portal, is a more broad-based, user-friendly type of portal.
You know what, I think I just realized, I had a misunderstanding of what you were talking about. When you said enterprise portal, I thought you meant a separate kind of portal for our utilities and enterprises.
No, sir.
That's not what you're talking
No,
about.
sir.
You're talking about
Enterprise.
just a fancier looking portal. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
We're in a vanilla period. I like vanilla. Let's go forward with vanilla.
Thank you, Mr. Delper. Please continue.
Okay, so a couple of concerns. I just want to remind us that the data migration is struggling to catch up, and it's pretty important that they get their thing in pretty good shape. Remember, we talked earlier about what the entrance criteria is for the first integration test cycle. And right now, my understanding, I'm still waiting, is that one of the entrance criteria needs to be that all master data has to be in place in order to be able to run the integration test. that's related directly to that. They gotta get that done. And they've got 3 weeks, okay? Assuming that they don't do anything over Thanksgiving. There are several gaps in the blueprint design. We've talked about them. They're becoming issues. People are worried about them. They're spending time trying to figure out what to do. And both of them, have potential change order impact. Same thing with, the whole universe thing and how you do that. I mean, if everybody backs away and says, okay, we're just gonna stick with this, not gonna worry about it, tell everybody you don't get to use Universe to get access to SAP, that may be the answer. Okay, and we really think that, the project planning and scheduling needs to have a reality check. The reality is you've got build work going on after 11/28. Let's make it visible. Warnings. The wording in that contract is pretty broad, although it does include the word all. And when I see the word all, then I basically say, okay, contractually that word is pretty significant. And therefore, I think it's important that Alden say, show me all, okay? This whole continued out-of-phase cost tracking could lead to some budget surprises. And really think that you got some exposure if all of a sudden you don't get some support from SAP right when you're trying to run all the tests and right when you're trying to do all the training classes and all that kind of thing. That's when you're gonna need it. And you really need to make sure that that's in place. On that note, how'd they do, Alden?
Thank you very much. Do you have any comments, Gordon, before we adjourn the
What do
session?
you think?
Mr. Training, you want to go first?
So what is the current cost right now in SAP? Where are we at money-wise? You at one time said we'd be approaching 80 million.
So right now, the assembly, and I don't know the exact number, it's 71,000,007 something is what has been appropriated by the assembly.
And
that
been
was-
spent?
And how much has been spent, or how much has been paid? Those are two different
Either
numbers.
one.
We're probably will be about, let's say 51 million paid. Spent, we're probably 56, 57,
Okay,
somewhere in
thank you,
that
Mr. Training.
ballpark.
Mr. Weddleton?
So we're looking a little bit different here. We're looking at the budget now, and we assume a go live on 7/1, and there's a lot of staffing changes related to that. People who are kind of working on getting it going, their positions go away, and other positions for maintenance and so on are created. And then we have to start paying for it out of operating budget. Have you looked at the staffing changes that we're assuming in the budget to see if they're reasonable?
No, I have not.
Is that something you can do before we approve a budget in a couple weeks? Is that in this job?
I can give it a shot.
I'm not even sure if that's in the.
I don't know how much of that has actually been done, but it's certainly, I can ask the question, and certainly the change management team ought to be looking at that. I mean, because they're the ones that got to figure out any kind of organizational changes and shifts. So I can ask the question.
The department budgets do show some position gone because SAP, and some show IT's up because of it and so on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Did you want to make any last
So
comments?
with
before
regards
we
to that,
adjourn?
obviously through the budgetary process, I worked with IT to identify positions in the future that was needed. Some of those were cut based upon overall budget type things in there, as well as the fact they had to look at department by department of how we can hopefully get efficiencies with the system and be able to cut backfill positions that were out there. Additionally, as you kind of heard, the AMS contract is kind of a contract that would provide some of those services out there. Do we do that contract and use it for services, or do we hire a person in IT? Those are kind of some of the decisions that are going through. So they're having a lot of conversations, and I know you're going through them and you've spent a lot of time on them. That's kind of the net result of all of those conversations that have been had over the last several months on that going forward responsibility and needs. Rest assured, and I always try to do this in my meeting and so forth, is give you an idea of what you might be seeing in the future, so you can kind of be prepared. As mentioned, the HEC is the off-site environment. I mean, that right now, that is the intention going forward, is that's where our system's going to be held in Santa Clara. There are charges for that. It's in the operating, and there's been discussions, but there's also contracts that have to go with that. So you're going to be probably seeing a HEC contract at some point. Additionally, you've been hearing about these AMS services, which I just brought up, which is the support services to make sure the system is running, where we don't have the technical wherewithal or the capability in-house to do that. That's another contract that has to be, because we have those contracts currently, but they're expiring in November and December right now. So you're going to see sometime between now and go live, requests coming forward to say, hey, we need these work to continue on, because that's where the system is and that's how we're supporting it. So expect to see different variations or versions of those kind of contracts going forward. Additionally, when we put those contracts forward to begin with, it was only for our test and development side, which is what we're in currently. When we go to July, there's a production side. Those are different sets of servers. So the contract cost actually goes up because you have to maintain all the development servers and you have your new ones. But that's what you're going to be seeing coming forward, mainly probably from Zoll's area and IT, because those are operating things that continue on. Those aren't associated with capital. That's to keep the system when you're going live. So you're going to see a variety of different contract requests that might be bridging us a little bit of a gap between when the contract's in and when we go live. And then you're probably going to see some variation of when we go live into the future to be able to fund all or to approve. But you're seeing the requests right now in the budgetary thing, when you've been seeing the money that's been put in there to do that. That's where we're funding it, and you're going to see those contracts as they expire and as we negotiate them through for that money to be spent on.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Well, as I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, SAP built the requirement of HEC into their latest update. We already agreed to use HEC. HANA to store this, so we have real choice now. You can't go back.
Well, we are in the HANA database. That is correct.
It's
Now,
already
HEC, however, is just the place where it's a bunch of servers. Just think of a whole room of servers like
It's
this.
a cloud basically.
Yes, we could at any point in time, if we either had the capability and the millions of dollars to put it in here, or some other area, if we could find a cheaper place, you could certainly move it to another set of servers. But we are on HANA as far as our database, and that's the system that we'll be using going forward. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Could I point something out on spending, just to answer everybody's question? These numbers that you've got in your document, okay, that's right off of PeopleSoft. The project to date cost is 48.9, okay? The understatement is 4.1. So if you add 4.1 to 48.9, you're going to get those numbers that he was talking about. That's 52 million. That's where you're at. The reason it's in this column is because this is your spending this year, which ties to what you approved early in the year. Okay, that's what that number is. So you basically you're at a 15 million this year against what you appropriated.
Thank you, Mr. Steele.
Yeah, my question, Alden, is what keeps you awake at night? What's your greatest concern with regard to this?
My greatest
training, is it equipment?
It's not training, I can tell you that.
You know,
My
is it
greatest
SAP
concern
stuff?
right now is data, because the system has to work data. We were a little late, not by much, but a little late getting our 65 files to SAP back office. They have them, but they're now telling us they won't be able to load all those files in advance of their time period. So my biggest concern right now is asking them to do whatever's necessary to get those files loaded. We're sorry we're a week late, but we need those files loaded so that we can have a successful SIT 1. That is my biggest concern and my biggest ask of SAP, that they do whatever it takes to make it happen. And I'm not getting a lot of warm fuzzy that that's going to happen, but we're going to try. That's my biggest.
As far as I'm concerned, your job is to look forward and to anticipate those problems that were coming down the pike, and that's going to be the greatest task, I think, in terms of identifying them. And because when that big surprise comes up, it's going to be a big surprise.
And one last comment, because it's kind of tied to this. We do have. I know Zig went over it quite a bit about me having to sign off to go to the next stage and having all this stuff out there. That is a huge concern. There is a lot of work that will not be done. It may not be critical work, but a lot of work that will not be done by the end of November. And having a composite list to make sure that SAP is held responsible to be able to do those things, it's actually a daunting task, to be honest. I can name about 150 things that could probably go on that list right now. that there's some work. We have 3 meetings scheduled in November to start putting that together, but given the fact that we're rushing to get all this other stuff done, I'm a little bit worried about the completing of that document. So those are my 2 biggest worries that I have right now.
Oh, but,
Okay, thank you. This meeting was scheduled for 1:15, but it's okay that we went over. If nobody has any other questions, thank you, everybody.